All right, guys, back at Hustler Casino Live, about to play some 2550. It's another wacky Wednesday with a 30K cap. It's an action game. There's plenty of whales. I'm not going to name names, but plenty of free money to go around. So hopefully things turn out in our favor. As always, I will check in with you guys right afterwards. Wish me luck.
Guys, we are back for another wacky Wednesday. Perhaps this might be the wackiest of all. Technically the blinds are $25.50, but typically the $100 straddle is on. There's also a $30,000 cap in this game until either the halfway point of the game or until someone is stuck $50,000. Kind of random, but those are the rules. Last thing to note, we are playing the bounty game today, which means if you win 3 hands in a row, you get $1,000 from each other player at the table. In this case, that would be $7,000 total if we're able to win 3 in a row. All right, let's go. In this first hand, I look down at Queen 9 offsuit, and there's already a player with 2 buttons in front of him, and that is Henry. He's got 2 buttons. If he gets another one, he gets $1,000 from each player. So I limp in, a small form of defense, if you will. And Henry pounces on this weakness by making it $2,100. Gets all the way back around to me, and I know that Henry could be raising any 2 cards, and Queen 9 might be the best hand. We are out of position, but I decide to play some defense, and we go to a flop. King 6 with 2 diamonds doesn't look great. Queen high will sometimes still be good, and we do have the Queen of Diamonds, but it's going to be tough to navigate if Henry applies a lot of pressure. However, he checks it back, and we see another king on the turn, so King 6. I check again, same reasoning as the flop. Queen high probably still best, but not really getting called by worse, I think. And now Henry checks it back, so I feel like we're likely up against either ace high or queen high from him as well. But then the river comes the 9 of diamonds, giving me a full house and essentially the nuts, given how the hand has played out. Now, I know Henry's going to want to call really light with whatever hands he played this way, not only because I might be bluffing, but like I said, he stands to win a bunch of money if he can win this pot. So for that reason, I decide to bet double the pot size. It's around $4,500, so I throw in $9,000, trying to put Henry in a miserable situation. Worth noting, I would also bet this size if I had some bluffs like Jack high or 8 high, 7 high. You guys get the idea. And now Henry is in a miserable spot. As you guys can see, he does not like it. He knows that he might be getting bluffed, but he also knows that if he calls, he wins my $9,000, whatever was already in the pot, plus 1K from each player, which is always fun. So after a bit of thought, he does eventually make the hero call. Unfortunately for him, this time it is no good. And just like that, we win a $22,000 pot to start the night. That means he no longer has 2 buttons, and instead, I now have 1. So let's see if we can win 2 in a row. The very next hand, I look down at pocket 7s in the big blind. There's a raise from Mitch to 400 on the button. He started with around 10K, so I think our hand is worthy of a re-raise. Often going to be ahead of the button's opening hands, so I make it $3,000 to go. Mitch now thinks for a bit and jams all in. And look, when it gets back to me, if he's got an overpair, so be it, but I know he could have a lot of bluffs, and he might even jam some smaller pairs, so I waste no time in making the call. We're also getting a great price, so off we go, and it turns out we have an amazing hand against his exact holding. 7-6 of spades is in terrible shape against pocket 7s. We run it just once, and even though he does flop an open ender, he does not get there, and we hold. So that's 2 in a row. We collect this nearly $20,000 pot, and of course are looking to win this next hand at all costs. Well, almost all costs. Here we go. In this one, Dylan raises to $400. Shay calls on the button, and I'm looking down at 10 deuce of diamonds in the small blind. We're suited, and if we play it aggressively, we might be able to take it down pre-flop. Of course, everyone can see that I have 2 buttons, so maybe this isn't a great idea since my credit score is probably really low here, but anyway, I make it 4,000. Henry folds king high, which is already a win, but when it gets back around to Dylan, he does not. Instead, he makes the call for 4,000. At least he doesn't jam. That's already a good result. But now Shay decides to back raise all in for his $20,000 stack. This is unfortunate, but I just don't see him having a super strong hand after flat calling Dylan's raise earlier. So I decide to get in there and gamble. Why not? It's only $16,000 more into a pot that's already pretty big. And like I said, we're incentivized to call here because we can collect $7,000 from the other players. Now, even with that in mind, this might be a little bit too loose, but I think I'm okay with it. In a lineup like this, I'm happy to give action, and I feel like we can't be doing that terribly with a suited hand. Dylan now thinks about it for quite some time and also makes the call, which is not ideal. We decide to run it twice. Usually when that happens, it's the top board that's going to count for whatever game is going on, in this case, the bounty game. So if we're able to win the top board, then of course we get at least half the pot plus the 1K from each player. Off to a run out, which comes ace high, no help for me aside from a diamond. The turn is a 10, which looks pretty good to me. River's an 8, and unless we're up against a hand like ace X, I assume we're going to win this one. Second board comes out without giving me any help, but at showdown, a 10 is the best hand up top, and just like that, we split Shay's money, myself and Dylan. And of course, I win 1,000 from each player. So we win the bounty game, we win half this pot. That is definitely better than I could have hoped for when going all in pre-flop with 10 deuce suited. About 15 minutes later, this hand comes up where Max raises to $200 from early position, and I'm looking down at 10-9 suited in the cutoff. I think re-raising here is okay, especially against Max. Him and I have some rapport and we give each other pretty light action, so I make it $700 to go. Max makes the call and we go to a flop of king, queen, 6 with no club. We do have a straight draw, but aside from that, not much going on. However, because I re-raised pre-flop, I could represent a lot of hands on this board. So when he checks, I bet $700 again. Max makes the call, and we see the 8 of diamonds on the turn, giving me what's called a double gutter. That means that I have 2 gut shots. A jack would give me a straight, and now a 7 as well. Plus, like I said on the flop, I could have a lot of strong hands, and those would all continue betting as well. So when Max checks, I decide to keep applying pressure, hopefully to put him in a tough spot with hands like ace jack, ace 10, maybe even a queen could fold. So I bet $2,400. But unfortunately, Max sticks around once again. So looking for some help on the river, and we don't get it. It's the deuce of clubs. Max checks it a third time, and now what do we want to do? Should we give up, or should we go for the third barrel? Well, I think we have an excellent hand to bluff again, and the reason I say that is we have no removal to ace high, we have no removal to diamonds that he might have picked up on the turn, and those are all hands that he might fold on this river since they don't improve. Now, of course, he could just have a king, and we're lighting money on fire if we're betting against the king, but I think we can fold out some better hands that just missed. Maybe even jack 10, even though I've got a 10. It's of course not impossible that he has that hand. So after a little bit of thought, I decide to bet, but I don't need to go too big to fold out the hands that I'm targeting. I put in $3,000 and Max says, "You got it," and folds. That, of course, is a great result. He folds ace high and we take this one down with just 10 high. Sadly, now I get nothing playable for about an hour and a half. So not much going on for me until this hand comes up where Wesley raises to $300. Max calls, Shay calls in the small blind, and I'm looking down at a beautiful hand in the big blind. Ace Jack suited. Worthy of a re-raise, especially against Wesley, who I think raises too many hands, honestly speaking. So I make it $2,100 to go. Wesley makes the call. Max also makes the call, but Shay folds. So the three of us go to a flop. I am out of position, of course. It comes 10-6-5. With 1 club. So we do have 2 overs, backdoor nut flush draw, backdoor straight draw, but it is a 10 high board, which is almost always going to favor the callers, and I'm out of position. So I think a check here is definitely the best play. Would also do this if I had over pairs. Wesley, however, does not check it back. He bets $2,100, around a third pot. Max gets out of the way, and against that size, considering how deep we are, we have a pretty clear call. So that's what I do, and we pick up some help on the turn. It's the 8 of clubs. It's always nice when you're drawing to the nuts, especially when it's pretty disguised, which a club on the river would be for me, I think. So I check it again, and now Wesley bets $6,000. Not the biggest bet ever. We're getting direct odds to call here, I think, or it might just be close, but even that aside, we have really nice implied odds since Wesley is pretty deep. Oh, I should have mentioned, Wesley added a bunch of chips. As you guys can see, he's got like $250,000. For that reason, I added some as well. I'm always looking forward to hopefully big pots, and I like playing deep stacked when other players are also deep. This is a perfect example as to why that might happen. Let's say he's got a set, 2 pair, maybe even a straight, and we end up making the nuts on the river. Well, you guys could see the obvious upside that might have. But anyway, I make the call and we get no help on the river. It's the 8 of hearts. I check it again, and now Wes checks back top pair. We lose this one in what could have been a great situation, but unfortunately this time, no help, and Wesley wins it. A few minutes later, I pick up another great hand, this time even better, pocket queens. There's a raise from Dylan to 300. I make it $1,200 on the button, and then Henry puts in a raise from the big blind. He makes it $4,400. Dylan folds, and when it gets back to me, I think both options are on the table. Henry should be pretty strong here because I am re-raising Dylan on the button. I'm incentivized to call a lot of hands on the button, and I think Henry knows that. So if he's re-raising, he's probably got something good. But at the end of the day, this is Hustler Casino Live, and people are just a little too aggressive pre-flop. I'm also guilty of that from time to time, and Henry is certainly no exception. So queen should still be the best hand. I decide to raise it up one more time. I make it $10,000, and Henry does not get sticky. He lets his ace-4 suited go, and we take this one down pre-flop. Now, of course, this isn't the most exciting hand of all time, but that's 1 in a row. And the very next hand, I get ace-king. I make it $400 to go from the cutoff, and then L re-raises on the button. He makes it $1,400. Henry gets out of the way, but now Wesley decides to raise also. He makes it $4,000, putting me in a somewhat precarious situation because L is left to act behind me. He's got like over 50,000. And of course, Wesley has me covered with a bunch of money in front of him. So how do we want to play ace-king offsuit? Well, as it turns out, ace-king offsuit is an amazing hand in tournaments or short to even medium stacked cash games. But when you're really deep, ace-king off is really not the best hand ever. So instead of putting in another raise and bloating this pot against what might be a better hand than mine, I decide to just call in position and see what L wants to do. Of course, re-raising again wouldn't be like the worst mistake ever. It might not even be a mistake at all, but this time I decide to play it chill and just call. L lets go of his ace-jack offsuit, and now we go heads up to a flop of 8-5-3 with 2 clubs. Unfortunately, we don't make a pair. The nice thing about slow playing ace-king pre-flop, or maybe slow playing is the wrong term, playing it passively, I should say, is that when you finally make an ace or a king, people almost never put you on ace-king. Unfortunately, this time we do not connect, but Wesley does continue betting. He puts in $4,000. Ace-king could still be the best hand, so I make the call. Not much thought to that. And then we see the 7 of hearts on the turn. I like this card because it's generally going to favor me more than Wesley since he was the last pre-flop raiser. That doesn't necessarily mean I have to turn my hand into a bluff, but I just think he's going to slow down a lot, and sure enough, he does. He checks it over to me. Now we could bet small or check it back. I decide to check it back since this is a 4-bet pot. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but pretty much if this was a 3-bet pot, I might bet some pairs. 4-bet pots, probably pot control more often, so I check it back, and we see the 7 of clubs on the river. Wesley now checks again, and I'm curious about whether or not ace-king can go for some value here. I don't know. It's pretty close. It's really, really thin, obviously, but I just think he has an ace so often here, and we have the best ace. But I decide not to get cute. I know Wesley is a solid player, and he would play, say, hands like pocket jacks or queens this way. Maybe not always, but often enough that a bet here is just a little too optimistic. So I just check it back. Wesley says king high, and we win. So that's 2 in a row. If we win one more hand, then we collect the bounty yet again. In this hand, there's a raise from Shay to 500. I am on his left with Jack 9 off suit. That's all the excuse I need. I make it 2,000, hopefully to get it heads up. Unfortunately, that does not happen though, as Dylan cold calls from the straddle, and Shay luckily does not raise. He comes along as well. So we do have position, and we flop top pair. This is an amazing situation now. Jack 5-4 with 2 diamonds. As you guys can see though, Shay has flopped a hell of a hand. He's got bottom pair and the nut flush draw. Checks to me, and I think you could go either way here between checking back or betting. My hand could use some deception, and it's really not the strongest pair ever if suddenly these guys start displaying a bunch of aggression. So I decide to check it back and see what happens on the turn, which isn't really my favorite card ever. It's the 6 of hearts, connecting the board a whole lot more. Checks to me, and this time I check it back again, trying to just get to showdown really. I'm happy to just win this pot, and of course the bounty as well. River card is even worse though. It's the 3 of hearts, so now there's 4 to a straight. Any 2 or 7 beats me. But both of them check again, which I think is a pretty clear indication that we have the best hand. So I think about it for a little bit on the river and decide to, just check it back. Are we really going to get called by a worse hand? Tough to say. Shay might have called with a 4, but in all honesty, I didn't really know if this was worth a bet. And of course, facing a huge check raise would be pretty annoying. So I just check it back, and a jack is good. So for the second time tonight, we win the bounty game and $7,000 along with it. A few rounds later, this hand comes up where there's a couple of limpers before I look down at 10-9 suited in the cutoff. A hand like this, I think, could limp along or put in a raise. I think both are fine. This time I raise it up, I make it $500, and now Wesley from the big blind raises it up to $3,000 with King 10 offsuit. The man is not afraid. Back around to me after the limpers fold. And knowing that Wesley gets really aggro pre-flop with a lot of hands, something I alluded to earlier, I feel like 10-9 suited is a nice candidate to occasionally combat that with another raise. If we get called, we have some nice board coverage on the lower textures, and of course we can represent ace-high boards. Not to mention, flushes and straights are possible. So I decide to get frisky with it this time. I make it $9,000 to go. Back around to Wes, and I expect this raise is going to put him in a difficult situation with a lot of hands, like ace X off, like let's say ace 10 or ace jack, king queen offsuit, maybe even pairs like jacks or queens from time to time. They're not going to love being in this situation out of position super deep. To my surprise, however, Wesley now raises again. He makes it $25,000. Which, I mean, right there is the evidence that this guy is a monster pre-flop. It's tough to play against this when you don't have super strong holdings, but of course, when you do have it, it's awesome because you win a lot of money. This time, however, I do not have it. I've just got 10 high, and we're facing another raise. It's $16,000 for me to call, and in all honesty, even though I know Wesley can be really crazy pre-flop, this is just a fold, in my opinion. Calling is not the worst thing ever. We do have some playability and can win a really big pot when we connect, but it's just a little bit too weak, and I don't like the way this hand interacts with his hands. I'd rather actually have, say, 7-6 suited, or maybe even 8-7 suited. You guys get the idea. But I think I make a mistake here and make the call. Probably a little too optimistic, but here we go. $50,000 in the middle, going to a flop of King 9-6. Mixed feelings about this one. We flop middle pair, which is never that bad, but of course with a king out there, we are losing to a bunch of hands. Ace king, king queen, king jack, pocket kings. You guys get the idea. There's a lot of hands that have us in rough shape. Wesley bets small, 15,000. I would expect him to do this with all his hands, including, for example, ace queen, ace jack suited, ace 5 suited. You get the idea. There's a lot of hands that we are now beating with our middle pair, and of course we can't fold after connecting, so I make the call, looking for some help on the turn, which does not come. It's the jack of clubs. Wesley checks it again, and now I make what I think is probably the biggest mistake of this session for me personally, and after a little bit of thought, I put in a bet. Now, I only bet like a third pot, so in all reality, this is not that big of a deal. We have a pair which could use some protection. We also have some outs with a queen, or even a 10 might help us out. But really, I don't understand this bet looking back at it. Is it a bluff? Is it protection? What exactly is going on here? And when the answer is not clear, I think it's probably worth looking at a little more closely. This is a spot that I think I'm going to try to study more in depth later on when I get to it. But anyway, I make this bet of $28,000, and Wesley makes the call. Now, suddenly the pot is $136,000, and we are in no man's land after having bet a 9 on the turn and getting called. By the way, another reason why I think that's also a big mistake is simply because how big the pot is. Making small errors or even inaccuracies, if you will, is fine when the pot is small or even medium, but when you start to make these plays in huge pots where the dollar amount is just larger than normal, it just really affects the bottom line, which is something you have to be careful with. But anyway, he checks the river, and at this point, maybe in the past, I would have turned my hand into like some sort of giga bluff and sent it in there all in and try to get him to fold. But I don't know, I started to think that it would just be compounding my mistake on the turn. I realized after he called my bet that it was probably a bad bet, and I decided not to dig a deeper hole on the river. I used to do that a lot when I was younger, is not play a hand the best way and just tell myself, well, here we are, time to just pedal to the metal, try to get out of this. And usually that would result in me losing even more just because I made a mistake on a previous street. Trying to be more mindful of that nowadays, and I kind of just wave the white flag here and check it back, not expecting to win very often. And sure enough, Wesley takes this one down with a king. Pretty frustrating hand because it's just such a big pot, but silver lining is I'm happy with myself for not going crazy on the river. Anyway, that brings us to the hand of the night. Many of you might have heard about this one already or seen it online. If you haven't, you're in for a treat. Here we go. In this hand, Wesley starts off with 2 buttons. That means if he wins this pot, he collects 1,000 from every player. And once more, we are trying to play defense against him doing that. There's a couple of limps. I decide to limp on the button, and then Wesley raises from the straddle to 4,000. Now, of course, I expected him to do this with probably like 75% of hands, if not more. So when it gets back around to me on the button, yeah, I've got 10-4 offsuit. I know, it's an awful hand. It's worse than awful. It should be like not even allowed. But because we are super deep and I know that Wesley is going after this money with almost any 2 cards, I feel like I can also get after it with almost any 2 cards and just put him in a miserable situation. So I decide to re-raise. I make it $15,000 to go, hoping he folds a bunch of holdings that might play this way, because at this point it's really just not worth it for him. He stands to win 7,000 from the bounty game, but I've made it $15,000. So does he really want to risk 15,000 to win 7 if he's got a mediocre hand? Probably not. The problem is my man Wes does not have a mediocre hand. He's got ace jack of diamonds, which is super strong in this situation, but it's still uncomfortable. He's facing a re-raise from me on the button, and I could have played a bunch of hands this way that have him in bad shape, including ace king, aces, kings, queens, a bunch of strong holdings that might have just limped in on the button, hoping that Wesley would raise and then pounce on it. Now, of course, I've got 10-4 offsuit, but Wesley does not know that, so he decides to proceed cautiously by just calling. This is a weird one already, guys, but we're off to a flop with over $30,000 in the middle, which comes down king 10-9 with 2 clubs. That gives me middle pair, and of course, a slight board advantage since I was the most aggressive player pre-flop. Wesley checks, and I decide to continue betting. I think on this exact texture, I like a bigger sizing. There's so many draws available that if I did have something super nutted like aces, kings, ace, king, even queen jack suited, or really any set, I would choose a bigger sizing. So I decided to go for 2/3 instead of 1/3. I make it $20,000. And now, if you thought this hand was weird, it gets even weirder as Wesley decides to check raise, but he misclicks and makes it a not legal sizing. It's too small. Take a look.
West side with the gut shot, Mariano.
5 more.
With just a pair of 10s. These two just going at it time and time again. And West side is raised. Wow.
He's trying to raise, right? He's trying to raise.
I'm just coming.
You're trying to raise, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I bet 20K, and he tried to make it 35, which of course is not allowed. Magic, the dealer, makes him put in an extra 5K. So raised to 40,000. Back to me now, and what the hell is going on? Why are we facing a raise on this board when I could have a bunch of strong hands? Does he have a super strong hand? Would he even raise with queen jack? I mean, yeah, there's a flush draw, but wouldn't he want to let me keep bluffing? This raise doesn't really represent a whole lot to me. And even if it did, I have a great hand to continue with, I think, against this sizing. We have removal to 2 pair, right? Like king 10, 10-9 suited, and of course, removal to pocket 10s, which he could easily have had based on how he plays pre-flop. So I don't really understand this raise. I feel like the value hands I'm most worried about are king 9, queen jack, and maybe pocket aces, but I quickly dismiss pocket aces because I feel like he would have just raised pre-flop if he had that hand, especially considering how deep we are. Not a lot of strong hands that I think he could have in this situation. And on top of that, he would have to have a strong hand and decide to play it this way. I'm not buying it. So after a little bit of thought, I make the call and we go to the 7 of hearts on the turn. Board is getting even sketchier now. There's another flush draw as well as multiple straight draws available. And Wesley does not slow down. He puts in $80,000 into a pot that's 110. That is a big bet. I can't remember the last time I have faced a bet this big. It certainly happened in the past, but it's been a while. So the blood starts pumping a little bit here, but I try to ignore it and just focus on the task at hand, which is figuring out what is going on in this hand. Okay, so what exactly is he representing? Well, I think he's still repping very little. The only hand that actually changes now is Jack 8 suited, makes a straight, and I guess he could have that hand, but aside from that, this shouldn't really change anything. So of course, Wesley could have some value. I'm not going to act like it's impossible for him to have a strong hand, but playing enough with Wesley over the years and just watching Hustler from time to time, I know that he could be way out of line with a ton of bluffs. Look at this board. He could have straight draws. He could have flush draws. He could have a 9 that he's turning into a bluff. He could have pair plus straight draws. Those, of course, might have me in bad shape, but you get the idea. The man knows how to apply some pressure, and I've seen him do it a lot with some questionable holdings, and I think this is one of them. Ace Jack of diamonds, I don't really see much reason to get insane with it, but here we go. I mean, he's bet $80,000 and it's back to me. And I just think about this one for a little bit, which I think is fair. Yeah, I mean, I kind of played slow this hand, but look at how much money this is. I wanted to take my time and figure it out. And what I ended up deciding was I have to have the best hand more often than not. Simple as that. We're ahead of all possible bluffs, and of course losing to his value hands, but like I've said many times throughout this hand, I feel like there are just a lot more bluffs available than strong hands. And when I come to that conclusion, I decide the best course of action is to just get it all in and try to deny equity from flush draws and straight draws. Because let's be honest, he's probably going to jam those on the river whether he gets there or not. So why not try to maximize fold equity and apply all the pressure we can? If he folds, say, a hand like a flush draw or maybe even 2 overs, whatever the case may be, that would be a huge win for us because we're not in great shape against those hands. So that's what I do. I jam all in. Of course, I'm happy not to get snap called, but like I said, I wasn't really expecting him to have a great hand, and when he doesn't snap call, I feel like that confirms my suspicions. Now it's back to Wesley, and he is in a miserable situation with Ace Jack of diamonds. An 8 or a queen would give him a straight, but I think he doesn't know that his pair outs are also good. Ace or Jack would of course give him the winning hand also. I feel like he might also consider that some of his straight outs might give me a flush, like say I had Ace 10 of hearts or Ace Queen of clubs, Ace 7 of clubs. I don't know, these kind of hands. I feel like he might realize that some of his outs could be dead. Now, of course, I don't have a flush draw, but these are thoughts that could be crossing Wesley's mind. And in this spot, unfortunately, he is just not getting the price to call. If he could see my cards, he would realize that he's got 41% equity, which is a lot when you look at how big this pot would be if he calls. But luckily, he ends up folding. This is by far best case scenario. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was probably the craziest hand I've played this year, if not in my entire poker career. This one is definitely top 3, off the rails for sure, and not really recommended, but luckily it ends up working out in our favor. And just like that, we are up a bunch of money this session. And let's not forget, the button game is still on. I collect a button and we move on to the very next shuffle where I've got pocket 3s. Now, I know it feels kind of weird to get back to this 1K bounty game after that monstrosity of a pot, but here we are. Mitch raises to 400, Shay re-raises to 1200, and I decide to cold call on his left. with pocket threes. Not something I do too often, but here we go. I make the call, and everyone else folds, so we're going heads up in position to a board of king 7-5. I'm happy to see Shea check it. I feel like more often than not, threes will be ahead. Tons of ace high hands that he might have here, so I bet small for a protection slash value. $800. Shea makes the call. Turn card pairs the board. It's another 7. Shea checks again, and this time I think you could go either way between continuing to bet or checking it back. I think a bet is probably a little better, but I decide to check it back, and we see the 6 of spades on the river. Shea checks again, and now I just check it back, hoping to win at showdown. And sure enough, that's what happens as he doesn't improve with ace jack. We collect this pot and, of course, our second button. We are in line to win our third bounty game of the night. Let's see if we can pick it up with this next hand. I look down at 8-4 of diamonds. Not that bad, all things considered. I decided to raise it up to $2,000. A big pre-flop size makes sense when there's so much at stake. $7,000 up for grabs. Again, just another reminder. Only Henry makes the call with his ace-5 offsuit on the button, and we go to a board of 9-6-3 with 2 clubs, 1 heart. Absolutely nothing going on for my hand. And really, it's a board that's going to favor him more than me. So I check it, kind of waving the white flag. But luckily, Henry checks it back, and we see the king of spades on the turn. Almost always going to be better for me than him. And after he checks back the flop, I feel like he's capped at 1 pair tops. For that reason, I decide to start applying max pressure. Would do this with strong hands, would do this with combo draws. Top pair, of course. I bet 150% the size of the pot. $7,000 going in there. Henry now in a miserable spot with ace high. What can he do, right? Does he really want to call down 7,000 in hopes of saving 1K? Probably not. So he lets it go. We turn over the 8-4, and just like that, guys, we've won another bounty game. In total, we've collected $21,000 by winning these bounty games. Needless to say, I am running hot tonight, and these bounty games are working out very nicely. Got a couple more hands for you guys tonight. In this one, there's a raise from Wesley to $300. Dylan calls on the button, Shea calls in the big blind, and I look down at ace-king offsuit once again. Are these the exact same suit that I had earlier? I can't remember. You guys let me know. But of course, I'm going to raise it up. I make it $3,000. Back to Wesley now, who once again pumps it up pre-flop. He makes it $8,000 to go. Everyone folds, and when it gets to me, well, like I said earlier, when you're sitting super deep, ace-king offsuit can definitely play as a call. Being out of position, I feel like it's probably better to put in another raise in this spot, as opposed to the last time where we were in position. But I decided to just call, mainly because I feel like Wes could be slightly on tilt, and if we're able to make a pair, we might win a lot more than if we make him fold pre-flop. So I make the call, and we go to a board of king 7-3 with 1 heart. A beautiful flop. Like I said earlier, guys, when you play ace-king passively pre-flop and hit top pair, it's almost never going to be a hand that your opponent expects. I check it over to him, and once again, he bets $8,000. I make the call. Worth noting, if he had bet smaller, I think our hand performs nicely as a check raise from time to time, but this time, since he bet half pot, I just call, and we see the 4 of diamonds on the turn. I check it again, and now Wes checks it back. River is the 7 of spades, and with 32,000 in the middle, I think we have a clear value bet on our hands, especially after he checks back the turn. So I decide to put in some chips now. In terms of sizing, I don't think going huge makes a lot of sense, but definitely want to bet a healthy amount since I could have some bluffs like missed flushes or straights. I bet $20,000, which is around 2/3 pot. Pretty much the same size I would use if I had some random missed draws. But Wesley makes a disciplined fold with ace queen high, and he makes it pretty quickly. Credit to him for that. I feel like I might have gotten curious with his hand, but he does not waste much time and lets it go. And just like that, we collect this pot as well. Now, this was the last interesting hand of the stream, but I did play one more big pot afterwards, and I got it on camera, so stay tuned. Let's jump into that. All right, so the stream has ended, and only 3 players remain. It's me, Elle, and Dylan Flashner. Everyone else has gone home. We decided to play shorthanded. 5,100 out of the blinds, and here we go. In this hand, there's a raise from Elle on the button. Dylan re-raises in the small blind, and I look down at black pocket 9s in the big blind. Good spot to put in another raise, I think, so I make it $3,200 to go. Elle gets out of the way, but Dylan thinks for a bit and makes the call. So we go to a flop, heads up in position, which, guys, it's just beautiful. It's the dream. 10-9-5. Yep, we have middle set, in a situation where Dylan will often connect with either the 10, some sort of straight draw. He might even have an overpair like jacks, for example. So of course we are going to continue betting. He checks it over to me and I bet $2,200. I think a small bet here isn't theoretically the best play, but in practice I like this because it might induce a check raise from time to time. Dylan knows that I could have all sorts of air, and like I said, he might actually have a strong hand. However, Dylan does not check raise. Instead, he just makes the call, and we see a beautiful turn card. It's the 8 of hearts. Now, of course, the most obvious straight draw has gotten there in Queen Jack. But aside from that, I feel like this card will often help Dylan with whatever he called the flop with. Let's say he's got a hand like Jack 10 or 8-7 suited, maybe even a random flush draw now. All these sorts of hands are going to hang on. So when he checks, I continue betting. If he's got the nuts, so be it. We still have outs on the river anyway. I bet $11,000 now. And as you guys can see, Dylan does not snap call. In fact, he thinks about it for quite some time. He's got around $35,000 to $40,000 behind, and what he decides to do eventually is jam all in. Well, like I said, if he's got it, he's got it. I quickly make the call, and just like that, we have another big pot with 2 river cards to come as Dylan asked to run it twice. I turn it over, and he shows Jack 10. Pretty much a cooler situation as he's got top pair and a straight draw up against a set. Looking to hold, of course. First river gives him 2 pair, but that is no good as a set is still ahead. Second river is a blank, the deuce of hearts. And just like that, guys, we win another massive pot. This one coming post-stream, which was a bit of a surprise, but of course a very welcome sight. Unfortunately, this ended up breaking the game, but luckily it was in our favor this time. As always, guys, I hope you enjoy the hands and stay tuned for some final thoughts.
All right, guys, that was another crazy session at Hustler Casino Live. This one, however, I would argue was a bit crazier than the others. That hand with Wesley, in fact, both hands with Wesley were a little off the rails. You could argue whether or not they were good plays, but you can't argue that they were interesting. Regardless, I am happy to announce another good result. The heater is alive. It's very alive, guys. I had the biggest win so far of 2025. I won just over $200,000 when you include the hand post-stream with pocket nines. Before I sign off, I wanted to announce the winner for the Ghost Town lyric video that Dear Delta posted a few weeks back. We came out with a new song called Ghost Town. If you haven't heard it, go check it out. Link is in the description. But I mentioned I would give $600 away to a random comment on that video. If this is your comment, if this is you, you got $600 headed your way. Shoot me an email or DM me, we'll figure it out. I will be doing more giveaways for our new releases, and we have a lot of new music coming up, plus some more shows. So if you guys are interested in checking out my band, you can do so by also clicking the link down in the description. I'm gonna have, ways to follow us on Instagram or get tickets for our upcoming shows. I'll be in London next week, by the way. Before I sign off, I feel like I should tell you guys that I will not be here. I will be in London. I'm going to try to play poker over there. I think they don't have very big games at the casinos, probably like 2-5. But I do think it will be an interesting one because I've never been to Europe. So I'm excited to check it out and hopefully capture some scenery for the YouTube channel. But yeah, guys, that's all I got tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It was definitely a fun vlog. As always, good luck at your local tables. Thank you for all the support, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.